Hello, everyone. This is Ted Check, Social Media Manager for the International Foundation for Protection Officers. I'm here with Dr. Martin Gill. Dr. Martin Gill is the, are you the, shall we say, owner or proprietor of Perpetuity Research? You're the lead researcher.
That's right. Yeah, yes. So
Okay.
I'm in charge of the company. I run the company. You
Gotcha.
wouldn't
Okay.
think so some days, but I do, in fact, in theory, run the company.
Gotcha. Okay, doctor. And thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. We're speaking across the pond here, and so it's the late morning here in the United States and the Eastern Coast, and you're over in the UK, somewhere in the afternoon.
Yes, yeah, later afternoon.
Gotcha. Okay, great. So yeah, what I wanted to do was talk about this groundbreaking research project that you are about to embark on. That is, the hope is that you're going to be looking at the future of security officers and the industry as a whole. But before we get into all of that, just a brief, if you could, a brief background on you and Perpetuity Research, please.
Okay, so by background, I'm a professor of criminology, and my specialism is the security world. So for many years now, I've been conducting research into different aspects of security at all levels, aimed at all different groups, from investigators to consultants to security managers to security officers. And the idea from my point of view is to conduct research which enables us to think differently to improve the security sector. I've also been involved, just to take a different slant, of going into prisons and interviewing offenders about their views of security, about the way they get around security. You can learn a lot from understanding the other side of the coin. So my research has been conducting globally over many years. I'm quite old now, you see. So that means I've done lots and lots of research. And of course, we hope to start the study of security officers.
Gotcha. And I worked as a security officer for a number of years, and now working for the IFPO, it's obviously very interesting to me as well. And what I find interesting is how the image of the security officer is, how people perceive it, and how it's changed over, I don't know, the past couple of decades or whatever. So, for example, you've probably seen or at least heard of the movie Paul Blart Mall Cop. So you've got this bumbling fool, who's got this low-paying job, and he's a good-natured fellow, but yeah, he just kind of stumbles across and manages to solve crimes and that sort of thing. So that, I think, is one major image that people seem to have. But also, working with the IFPO, I've seen the actual role of the security officer kind of evolve from this observe and report model to more of an active, almost a quasi law enforcement type of role that security officers have assumed. Can you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the challenges for the security world is that for many people out there who are not involved in security, I'm talking about the global general public, their view of security is based often on their perception of the security officer. And the security officer role is the window to the security world. And I think one of the really most damaging and, in a way, most unattended to issues is that the whole security world, therefore, is in a large sense judged by that particular role. And you might think, therefore, that the security world worldwide would have come together to say, let's enhance that. Let's make sure that role is central. But by and large, it hasn't. I mean, you're quite right to say that it's improved dramatically over the last few decades. And that's been globally. I mean, that's generally been true. But it would be more accurate to say it's improved dramatically in pockets. And like all worlds, you're often judged by the lowest common denominator. And sadly, there are a number of low common denominators. And there are various reasons for this. And partly it's because the role has been undersold, underappreciated. And in many ways, the world hasn't got to understand its full potential. And I think that's one of the real reasons why this is so important. One, it's the window into the security world. Two, it's at the sharp end of security practice. And it's at the customer engagement and the public engagement. But that it has an absolutely fundamental importance to the protection of societies. And there's a tendency to think of security officers as protecting private assets and therefore somewhat marginal to policing. But actually nothing could be further from the truth. If you take most public spaces, I'm talking about shopping centres, universities, hospitals, museums, and a whole range of other places where people gather around the world. In large part, not just in the United States, but in large part around the world, and take my own country, the United Kingdom, these are mostly policed by private security officers. In many other countries, it's non-law enforcement, it's sort of quasi-police in different ways. But the point is that in many of these locales, we put our faith in these private security officers, under-acknowledged, underrepresented. And these largely do a very, very good job. And they do a largely very, very good job, not least because they look after this place without the need for outside help. And they call on outside help as and when needed. What a wonderful resource. If you were designing a system to help the public protection, you might design it something like this. But that assumes that it's all done in a very strategic way, and it isn't. It's done in a haphazard way. But therein lies the potential to harness all these resources broadly involved in policing, and you've really got something there, and a crucial role would be the role of private security. But we need to look at the examples where it's outstanding, and there are many of these, but they don't get the publicity and they don't get the attention. And of course, part of the thing about the security officer role is so diverse. I mean, what a security officer might do at night time looking after, say, a building site or a construction site would be totally different to what's done in the day, for example, during a shopping centre, a shopping precinct. I'm not sure the word you use over there. For example, in a museum. I mean, it might be a different type of role altogether. And in some of these cases, it's quite sophisticated. They're acting on intelligence provided from some central hub. They're using technology to enhance their role. They're engaging with members of the public and on a daily basis and looking after their welfare, including in very stressful situations. They're doing a whole range of important customer service roles, largely unacknowledged, largely just in a very secluded context. They're not united in any way. And that's why the work of the IFPO has been important in speaking up and drawing attention to this role. Increasingly beyond the United States as well. So, but the point is it hasn't been examined, and this is the idea of this research, to throw some light on these sorts of issues. What are the roles? What are the things that enable them to work effectively? What are the barriers to working effectively? What's the process of recruitment and engagement? What are the issues about training? What are the complexities involved in making all this work? And you could be forgiven for thinking, given its strategic importance, that it would have been done years ago. But it's been largely the forgotten role in the security sector. I say forgotten, but unexamined, perhaps.
Right, and Chris Herdig, who was on the board of the IFPO, that's how he refers to security officers as forgotten members of. He calls it an invisible empire. These are people that security officers are those that people really don't think about in any critical way, except to maybe criticize.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with, I know, I mean, Chris, of course, been a long time supporter of security officers, and for many, many years, he's championed the case. And I think he's right. I think that for me, it's not so much they're not visible, it's the fact that they're not coordinated, supported, engaged in any strategic way. And it's left to pockets of activity where performance can be quite outstanding and frankly sometimes not so. The problem is that we haven't made any systematic attempt, I mean we, the security world more broadly around the world, to highlight what we need to do to change attitudes here in a way that provides for all the potential they have to do good, to be harnessed and fulfilled.
And you know something, Doctor, just kind of occurred to me. I think this is a great time. There's probably no better time than now for what you're doing because uh, I've seen, at least in the United States, maybe you could speak about the UK, but here in the United States, the number of security officers is rising and the number of police officers is decreasing at the same time. So, you know, we're just seeing, I can at least tell you anecdotally, I don't, you know, I can't give you hard numbers, but you know, I'm seeing more security officers taking on roles that are, you know, somewhat of a law enforcement manner, you know, being hired to patrol, you know, and detain suspects, which I mean, I don't believe they are allowed to actually charge someone, but detaining them until police can arrive. I mean, that is taking more of an active rather than a passive role, where we've seen security officers, you know, do in the past. So maybe you can talk about that. Do you have the same kind of thing going on in the UK, where you've got more security officers?
There's always been more security officers, about 3 times as many security officers as there are police officers.
3 times.
Um,
Okay.
but back to Chris's point, they haven't been very visible. I mean, they haven't been very united. They haven't been very engaged. They're seen as a separate thing. They're seen as largely untrusted. There's a very generally, I think, negative view of law enforcement towards public security, private security. And I think by and large, the general public would agree with the police that they're very marginal. But you know what? We haven't done very much to change that view. There's a new initiative out in the UK, but which is along these lines, which is trying to do something. But one thing is crystal clear around the world. One of the reasons why this is nowhere near as good a state as it should be is because the security world more generally hasn't worked anywhere near hard enough to engage people in changing opinions. And it's his own fault. You know, I blame the security world as much as I blame anyone for its own limitations here. And I think it's important. I think it's really, really, really important here. Because we've not learned to appreciate, either as a government, either as communities, or either as a security sector, the enormous potential to show off what frontline security people can do when recruited properly, trained properly, engaged properly, deployed properly, and managed properly. And it does need all of those to fulfill the potential, but done well, it becomes a very, very good assistance to the police. But anyway, they're assistance to the police. Every place they're located, they are the eyes and ears. They are there to observe, deter, report, and act. And by and large, they don't do a bad job. They often do a very good job. They sometimes do an outstanding job, but they always have the potential to be a tremendous influence for the public good. They're prayed for privately a lot of the time, but that's a public benefit. And we haven't made anywhere near enough of that.
So we've got a kind of a PR problem.
That's it.
The industry does. So I guess, I mean, so they all have to kind of come together, all of the various groups, various agencies, companies. Is that the idea, that they kind of all need to be a united front?
Well, I think the representative associations could have a united front. And of course, the companies themselves are in competition. But let me just go back one. Let me go back one here, because one of the reasons that I think it's been difficult has been the lack of true understanding of the modern role and all its complexities. In the olden days, the night watchman was the original sort of concept, someone keeping watch overnight to make sure that something was protected. That's still done, that's still a role, but it's largely been replaced by technology. But the principle, we have people who look after us, after our buildings and our premises and our environments, is not just a nighttime activity, it's a daytime activity. And it's a very common one, it's a ubiquitous one, and it's an important one. And there is so much potential to harness that for the broader public benefit. in a much more dynamic, strategic, engaged way that we have rarely tried to do in any country, very rarely. I mean, there are examples where law enforcement and private security work well together. There are a lot more examples where they don't, a lot more, you know, I mean, that's the more common answer. Even when they say they do, they often don't. It's some sort of a scheme. But that is sort of crazy. I mean, if you're sitting back as an offender, and I go into prison and interview offenders, and let me tell you what offenders say, speaking generally for a moment. I've interviewed armed robbers, burglars, thieves, arsonists, drug dealers, murderers, and you know, when you're an offender and you're going to commit a crime, the single most important consideration is you don't get caught. That's the single most important consideration.
Makes sense.
Absolutely, no brainer Britain there. And the single thing that they're worried about in terms of getting caught are people intervening. Do you know, this week, let me give you a little story. You need to let me tell you before I start this sentence, I need you to listen to the end of it, because it's going to start off quite bad. On Wednesday of this week and the 3 previous Wednesdays, I've been shoplifting. Now, over here, retailers pay me to hire shoplifters to go and steal from them.
Oh, okay.
And when I steal from them, I then give all the goods back and explain to them how they can improve their security. It is a wonderful view of the security world. And can I tell you that when we are committing these crimes, which is for real in a sense, I mean, as far as we're approaching it, it's a real, I mean, the stores don't know. If we're caught, we've got a letter to get out of it, of course, but they don't know it's happening.
Okay.
So it's very scary, I might add, but it's very, very real. The single thing we're all worried about, the security officer. Because the security officer is physically there at the scene. I remember a few years ago, I did a study with murderers, and I had 10 murderers in a focus group discussion in a prison cell. Can you remember 10 murderers and me in a cell?
Wow, yeah.
Amazing. And I said to them, and one of the questions was, I said to them, now let me tell you this, on the day of you did your murders, was there CCTV about, right? And they weren't that bothered about CCTV. They weren't that bothered about it, okay? Partly because they were drunk or on drugs, or they weren't thinking about, they were so angry they weren't thinking about the consequences, mostly that reason. But one of the murderers said to me, listen, why do you worry about a camera? It can't jump off a wall and arrest anyone. It's people who bother me. Absolutely, it's people. We forget how big a deal that is. And you know, in one of the stores we went in, we were caught twice by a security officer who was really on the ball. And the things that scared us the most, security officers coming to arrest us. You know, in our case, we wouldn't get arrested because we've got a car, but you get what I mean. Sure. And we underestimate, we've lost the plot world on just how important and big a deal this human role is, this human interface. And there is so much great potential here. And the idea of this research project is we begin to understand that role more. We begin to really get to grips with understanding what this role does, how it interacts, what it's going to take to make it successful, what the barriers are to doing so, how we engage, what the complexities are, and how we can begin to think about this role differently. And once we've done that, we've got something to sell to the world and engage with the world. But at the moment it's tricky because we haven't got that information base. That's why this research is so important.
Gotcha.
So when Sandy Davis first approached me about this, Sandy came to me.
She's the executive director of the IFPO.
Yeah, executive director. Came to me and started talking to me about it. I said, this is a fundamental gap in understanding. And we agreed, and we were talking like, you know, very much like you are, on very similar lines. And so together we've been working on developing this study. Great.
And also I had to mention that Security Magazine is also involved in this
right.
project.
So Security Magazine's become very supportive, very engaged, and of course, because you would think this is an unqualified good. I mean, I'm a researcher by background. That's my primary work. This is a major gap in understanding. And there have been studies of security officers, but not like this, not in a modern context, and of course, not post-COVID. That
Right.
coronavirus has, in a sense, had an impact on the way in which we perceive the security officer. And I do thought leadership webinars. I do 2 a week, every week, worldwide global audience. Sandy Dates has been involved in 2 of them. And, you know, one of the things that comes through these thought leadership webinars is that, you know, we're being told the role of the security officer is changing. It's changing because they're now at the forefront in dealing with issues related to COVID. There are other people who are saying, but it won't last. COVID will go away, recession or economic austerity is going to come, and then it'll all go back to where it was. Who's right? Now, we don't know who's right? Because we don't know. It's not happened yet. But my point is, it is an unqualified good that they've been seen to play an important role. But let's not get carried away here. Let's understand what's going on and begin to understand the context and the circumstances that are impacting on what stops this becoming a long-term good and what needs to happen to make sure that we maximize the potential for learning.
You know, you bring up COVID, and there was an interesting dynamic that happened here in the United States, and maybe you can talk about the UK as well. When the coronavirus first hit, there were a number of security officers that were laid off, particularly those who worked in tourism areas, like down in Florida, in Nashville, Tennessee, in Las Vegas. However, once the looting started, then there was a different need for security officers that you know percolated. So I'm fascinated by that, and you know, I started seeing some of the major companies here in the United States saying, hey, guess what? We need 1,000 security officers. We need 500 security officers. You know, things like that started happening. Anything like that happening in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the parallel here would be more airports, I think, were and events were suffered badly. Retailers and the need to protect empty buildings was seen as a positive. So there have definitely been these sort of dynamics here. But here's the point, that this is typical, this is characteristic, and it's a positive. Security is supplied according to need. What I want to understand is what are the dynamics of those roles when they are needed and when they're not needed. We need to understand a lot more about this, a lot more about what's the context and the reasons why they're engaged and they're not engaged. When they're deployed, what's the ways in which they're able to be most effective and not effective? And what is it going to take to think differently about this role? And these are the things that we're going to be tackling in this research project. And this is why it's both of global significance, of immense importance, and a great opportunity at last to get some thinking and some action behind a group of people who are fundamental to protecting the public on a daily basis, and who are the window to the security, the perceptions of the security world. And that is holding us back. It's holding back the potential for the public to be better protected because people are skeptical, and they're skeptical often because of ignorance and because we haven't persuaded them that it can be a very, very different.
So this research is going to give us in the industry kind of that you know, something that I don't want to say, well, for lack of a better term, ammunition. It's going to give us like, hey, this is the evidence right here. Take a look at this.
Yeah, it's a reference point. I mean, we need a reference point. We've got to have a reference point. There you go. I mean, and we lack that right now. And so it's a great opportunity. We're very excited about it. It's got enormous potential to change views, but to attract attention. And I think that what we will be able to do from this, if we get the engagement of the sector, is present a very different way of thinking differently. And that is so important and so long overdue and so critical to maximising the potential of security officers and security companies. And you know what? Their clients too.
You know, well, I want to ask you, how are you going to go about this research? How are you going to conduct interviews, look at some data? How are you going to go about it?
So the first thing we'll do is we'll crystallise what's can be gleaned from what's been done before. There have been studies of security officers, they're mostly dated, and they haven't looked at it in quite the way that we intend to. From that, we'll develop a survey instrument, and we'll conduct surveys of security officers, and we'll make that available across many different countries. In that, we'll be asking security officers for their views about how they see their role and what they see the barriers progressing. We'll also, I think, look at their supervisors as well. So those on the front line and engage them. And then we'll take a selection, we'll conduct interviews to find a little bit more in depth about some of the things that come out of the survey. So it's a great chance, great opportunity, great excitement we have, one that I think, when produced, will attract an awful lot of attention from an awful lot of countries and provide a way in which we can at last begin to not just in a few pockets of circles of gossip talk about how important this is, but provide ammunition, initiative, impetus to bring about change.
You know, Doctor, one of the things we mentioned, Chris Hurtig, he kind of initiated a little spirited discussion, if you will, through email about security officers and whether they are or not, here in the United States at least, first responders. We have this term, first responders. I don't know if that's a term that's used anywhere else in the world, but here it's mainly defined by governments. It's reserved, it seems, at least at this point, reserved for emergency medical technicians, police officers, firefighters. Those seem to be probably the top three roles that this term first responder is reserved for. And my argument was, you know, it's kind of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law kind of thing. I'm like, well, I said, security officers are first responders. They are oftentimes the first on the scene. Therefore, they are first responders, whether they are defined by any local, state, or federal government as such. They are the first responders. I mean, if you have a security officer, and like something that happened to me 25 years, 30 years ago, where I was a security officer, and here comes this guy running at me he was running from the state police. Well, I was the one that apprehended the guy, and then the state police came. So therefore, I was the first responder. Any number of examples you can think of like that, where even in a first aid role where a security officer has to render aid, whether it be CPR or a defibrillator, external defibrillator, things like that. So is that anything that you plan to explore with the research?
Yeah, I mean, let me tell you this, using those words quite literally without the legal connotations, obviously security officers are first responders. I would like to know, but I'll wager a bet, they respond more often as a collective than any of those other agencies that you mentioned. Well, I don't know about medical, but certainly, you take law enforcement and fire. I mean, there are so many security officers dealing with so many incidents on a day-to-day basis, and they're so engaged that I expect that. But the point is, the reason why it's defined in that way, I'm not surprised at all. But we've made no systematic attempt to persuade the world that it should be any different. Security officers have been left to get on, do their things in their pockets. And we haven't, as a world, I mean, there's organisations like IFPO have been fantastic in highlighting the role of the security officer. Other groups in other countries fulfil a similar purpose, focused on doing it. But in terms of generating research and bringing about a different type of thinking, that requires a much bigger dynamic than any one association or one group can do. And groups haven't been set up for that purpose. They've been set up for training or for other things. But what we've got a chance to do here is to generate that sort of insight and thinking so we can do that. And I see that as really, really important. So I blame the security world. We can't blame others for defining first responders, as you've just put it, in terms of those three and excluding security officers, because whatever statistics I produce on the number, or whatever I might say how important it may be, or you or anyone else, no one has systematically come together to persuade anyone in any evidence-based way it should be any difference. Serves our right.
That's a very good point. So this is an opportunity to kind of reverse that, if you will.
Yeah, it's got to start somewhere, and I see this research as a really good starting point. I'm really quite excited about it. I expect when we get out there and talk, we're going to find a whole range of things, real world things that stop people performing well. Some of these will reflect poorly on the security sector, I expect. There are those who I'm sure are going to tell us that their roles are hindered by their own companies or their own managers. But more broadly, I hope we begin to understand what are the structural things that we're going to need to do to make this role important. Where are the barriers? Let's highlight these, not in a naming name sense, but in a independent research sense. Because one of the good things we'll do is we'll go in and part of independent research is we'll go in and we'll speak to people like you, and it'll be right from the beginning to say, this is a research interview, it's done under research conditions. Under research conditions, what I'm going to ask you is whether I could speak to you about your role. This is what I'd like to speak to you about. The condition is that I won't name you or any company that you name, but in return, you'll let me use what you say for my research purposes, but I'll anonymize it. So, that's the rule, and you have to say, yes, I agree to that. It's all very, structured. You can't just go in and start speaking to someone. There's rules that have to be followed here. And it means that, when I speak to you, you're able to say, tell me about your role and about what's going on and about the issues without that fear or that concern that it's going to be passed on. So that's what we hope to do, get those sort of insights from those who are really at the sharp end. That's the key here.
Gotcha. And so, Doctor, we need, there's currently a fundraising drive for this. The IFPO has contributed $15,000.
It has. Good on the IFPO.
That's a sizable chunk of what's needed. I think still there's about $60,000 that's needed before you can start.
Correct.
Is that right? So, yeah, and this is going to contribute. We're going to take this video and disseminate it as far and as wide as we can. And I will drop in the description of this video on YouTube. I will drop a link so that people can then contribute. They can donate.
Excellent. Thank you. Excellent. Well, thanks for doing your bit. It's a really important contribution to make. We're just starting now, but we can move quickly, and I hope that in the long run people will see that this is long overdue. Great potential to change, and an exciting opportunity not just for those involved in working with security officers, but for the security world more generally.
Great, and I'm going to keep in touch with you, and we'll do periodic updates if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Kind of bring people along on the journey.
Absolutely, love to.
Great, Doctor. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I'll let you get back to your research, your other research. I know you do lots of other research for Perpetuity. So thanks so much again for your time.
Thank you for inviting me, and look forward to speaking to you again.